This is your tech news briefing for Monday, December 12th. I'm Zoe Thomas for the Wall Street Journal. When it comes to corporate management, typically there's someone at the top, a chief executive, to make all the final decisions. But at the software giant Salesforce, that spot has been held by two people. Until at the end of last month, co-CEO Bret Taylor stepped down, leaving his counterpart, Salesforce co-founder Marc Benioff, as the sole chief executive. Now, Taylor said he wanted to return to his entrepreneurial roots, but sources tell the Wall Street Journal there's more to the story than that. And with us to talk through it is WSJ reporter Emily Glazer, one of the reporters who broke the story. Hi, Emily. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Zoe.
So let's start with some basics, because Salesforce has this unusual management structure, these co-CEOs. How is it supposed to work, and why has Salesforce chosen to structure itself this way?
It is a bit unusual to have co-CEOs. Usually one person has the top job and someone else might be a chair or a co-founder. But in this case, Salesforce has had this model two times, not once. Marc Benioff, who's co-founder of Salesforce and a co-CEO, had it a couple years ago with someone named Keith Block, and then continued that model with Bret Taylor, who became co-CEO about a year ago. And in the case with Bret reports to Marc, but a lot of the top executives have been reporting to Bret. And the ideal is that they divvy up responsibilities and both are in touch with the board. But I think, as we know with anything, it's really hard when it's two people. There's usually one main decision maker at the end of the day. And Salesforce and Marc Benioff are synonymous. Marc Benioff is an extremely well-known CEO, a statesman of the industry. His influence goes beyond just Salesforce to Silicon Valley, the political world. He's very vocal on a lot of issues. So he's kind of a larger than life personality, which means that for anybody, it's hard to be second fiddle or a co-CEO.
Let's talk a little bit more about what happened here. We know Bret Taylor said he wanted to return to his entrepreneurial roots, but there's more to this story, as your reporting showed, right?
Indeed. So just recently, Salesforce announced during its earnings that Bret Taylor would be stepping down at the end of January as co-CEO and would be leaving the company and returning back to his entrepreneurial roots. And the announcement came out. A lot of people were very surprised. I should add that Salesforce, their business has not been doing very well. It's a cloud provider. It's one of the giants in the industry. Obviously, a lot of companies are facing economic headwinds. However, we thought that seemed a little sudden. And it turns out from our reporting, multiple sources, that there were tensions building for months between Marc Benioff and Bret Taylor, specifically over what their responsibilities were and how the business was run. We know the business was not doing as well and still isn't doing as well. And it also turns out that Marc Benioff became frustrated about how Bret Taylor was spending his time. What's key to remember here is that Bret Taylor had been chairman of Twitter, which turned into a much larger role when Elon Musk ended up buying Twitter, and it was a very drawn-out, months-long negotiations. And Marc Benioff thought that Bret Taylor was also spending too much time with other CEOs and customers, not enough time on Salesforce product and engineering, and so there were issues bubbling up for quite some time.
So how do we know all of this?
Well, we know this from multiple sources that we spoke with. And we also know that these cracks started forming in recent months and there was more friction between the men. And within Salesforce, this was well known by a number of people. They saw it. It even got to the point where executives, most of whom were reporting to Bret, were then starting to hear more directly from Marc Benioff as the business started to lag. And there was confusion over who they should really be reporting to and who is in charge.
Has Salesforce commented at all about this?
Well, when Bret Taylor's planned departure was announced, he said he felt at the time it was, quote, time to return to my entrepreneurial roots, particularly given the landscape and economy going through such shifts. And also at the time of Bret Taylor's departure being announced, Marc Benioff thanked him for his service at Salesforce and said he wasn't happy about the departure. He said, quote, I know he wants to go create a third great company. And Benioff said he hoped Taylor would return to Salesforce.
This isn't the only big development that Salesforce has had recently. It was announced that the CEO of Slack, which Salesforce bought last year, was going to be leaving. That was announced around the same time. What do we know about his departure?
So just recently, Stuart Butterfield, the CEO and co-founder of Slack, the company said that he plans to leave the company next month. And there isn't a whole lot known there, but it's important to note that Bret Taylor was credited as the architect of Salesforce's $27.7 billion purchase of Slack. It's Salesforce's biggest acquisition ever, and it has been reported generally that Stuart Butterfield and Bret Taylor got along very well. They're both entrepreneurs. Bret Taylor had also sold some companies. He even joined Salesforce through an acquisition. So there are definitely management changes at the top of Salesforce right now, not just with Bret Taylor.
You mentioned some business slowdowns at Salesforce, and we are seeing this across tech. But what comes next for Salesforce, given the business environment and given the departure of these executives?
We know that in recent months, Marc Benioff has grown frustrated with the company's slowdown. In its most recently reported October quarter, sales grew 14% from the prior year, which was down from 27% growth in the same quarter a year earlier. And we know that Benioff has examined company execution issues in addition to the broader economic downturn. So obviously there are some changes that impact any company based on what's happening broadly in the economy. But what we've heard from our sources is that Benioff is also looking at what the company is doing and not just blaming it on macro issues.
All right, that's WSJ reporter Emily Glazer. Thanks so much for joining us, Emily.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it for today's Tech News Briefing. If you want more tech stories, check out our website, WSJ.com. I'm Zoe Thomas for the Wall Street Journal. Thanks for listening.